Woke Supremacy News.
Enforcement vicious monsters and the president of the United States, the enemy of the people. We got a prime lesson in just how effective it is when a corrupt president is allowed to put so many judges on the bench. That's because a federal judge who Trump picked today did him a huge favor, to put it in Trumpian terms, on an investigation that could not be more critical to our national security. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon released her ruling today granting the request by Trump's legal team for a special master to review the material seized from Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort and residence to look for any privileged material. Now, while that process unfolds, the judge is blocking the Justice Department from continuing its investigation into Trump's theft and grossly negligent mishandling of classified documents. Now, not only has every single federal prosecutor and former Department of Justice lawyer that we have spoken to on this show said there was no need for a special master in this case, so did Trump's own former Attorney General and fixer, William Barr.
I think the whole idea of a special master is a bit of a red herring. What people are missing is that all the other documents taken, even if they claim to be executive privilege, either belong to the government because they're government records, even if they're classified, even if they're subject to executive privilege, they still belong to the government and go to the archives. If, in fact, he sort of stood over scores of boxes, not really knowing what was in them, and said, I hereby declassify everything in here, that would be such an abuse and shows such recklessness that it's almost worse than taking the documents.
Now, what we know is that Donald Trump admits that he took the documents. He admits that they were not only in a storage room in his completely insecure resort, but that they were also in his private office. We know that some of these documents were classified, with markings putting them at the highest level of the most highly protected materials in the U.S. government. And among the materials seized were numerous envelopes marked classified that were completely empty. And yet, despite all of that, this 41-year-old judge, appointed by Trump in the waning months of his presidency, has decided that Trump has the right to have the investigation of that crime halted. Leading up to this investigation, Harvard constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe said this about the judge, quote, she could either redeem herself by starting to act like a real federal judge, unaffected by the identity of the president who appointed her, or earn the condemnation of national security experts and legal mavens by botching the biggest case most judges ever touch in a lifetime and endangering the lives of our spies abroad, unquote. It now appears that she has chosen to do the latter. Perhaps it should not come as much of a surprise, though. She telegraphed last month that she was already inclined to rule in Trump's favor. This is, of course, what Trump has always had in mind for his appointed judges, for them to do his bidding. And MSNBC opinion columnist Dean Obeidallah writes, Trump himself encouraged Americans to think of federal judges as beholden to the presidents who appointed them. Remember, Trump has gone on the attack against judges appointed by President Obama as, quote, Obama judges. In 2016, he attacked a federal judge who was handling a lawsuit against his corrupt, fake Trump university, and even called for his recusal because he was, quote, an Obama pick, totally biased, hates Trump. He did the same in 2018 when a judge appointed by President Obama put a hold on his plan for refusing asylum applications from immigrants who crossed the border illegally. With Trump, he always looks at everything as my or mine. My generals, my Kevin, my classified documents, my judges. Apparently he's got one. Joining me now, Hugo Lowell, congressional reporter for The Guardian, Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation, and Glenn Kirshner, MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor. And Elie, I'm going right down the middle to you because I'm not a lawyer, you are. But even I know that if I went into a bank and robbed it, brought the money home, took it home, and then went and spent a bunch of it and bought a Birkin bag and a car and all sorts of things, and the feds came to take it, I couldn't then say, hold up. I'm gonna need you to get a special master, and they're gonna need to, go through all this stuff because that's my bag, and that's my car, and that's my money. How on earth could a judge who made it through law school think that Donald Trump can take the property of the government, the federal government, take it home, and then have to have a special master decide whether they can investigate him?
Because she's biased and corrupt. Like, I don't know what to tell everybody anymore. Like, I've been saying this since he took office. When you allow Republicans to control the courts, you get nothing. Trump judges do not believe in the rule of law. They do not believe in precedent, do not believe in facts. They do not believe in logic. They just believe in whatever's going to help Donald Trump. And they've proven it again and again and again. So when I say that you cannot trust Trump judges, I don't know what more evidence you need for that fact, right? Like, look, the argument that he has executive privilege is so what the scientists would call stupid that it's difficult to explain it, right? Like the idea that, first of all, privilege goes to the current president. We only have one president at a time. So it's not Trump's privilege to have. But even if it was, as you pointed out, with Bill Barr, who believes that the executive of the United States is something closer to a king than a president, even Bill Barr says that if he had a privilege, that privilege still goes with the government, not with Trump. And so these documents belong in the archives. It'd be like if Trump's called for executive privilege over the plane and then parked the plane, Air Force One, at Mar-a-Lago. Can't do that. Even if it was his, we'd have the right to take it back. But when you allow Trump judges to infect the system, these are the kinds of decisions you get. And people, and this is my last point, people in the media need to stop standing for these Trump judges, need to stop pretending that these Trump judges are like the rest of the judicial system, right? They have to stop carrying water for them and start calling them out as they are, corrupt, leave behind gifts from the Trump administration to destroy the rule of law in America.
Just real quick, and I'm going to get my other guests in, but just stay with you for just a second, Ellie. Does it surprise you that her justification for saying that you're wrong about that and that he can claim executive privilege against the current president, that she cited Kavanaugh, one of his other judges, and said that, well, Kavanaugh says that he can do it. So apparently, according to her, he can take the Air Force One home, park it at Mar-a-Lago, and at least she and Kavanaugh would be like, it's an open question.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me because, again, the argument is so stupid that she's got to reach for straws. Like, she's got to grab at whatever there is because there's no actual legal basis for her ruling. But even Kavanaugh, even the Kavanaugh opinion he cites, he said maybe. He didn't say definite. And so to go from Kavanaugh's maybe to like actually appointing a special master, remember, the whole point here is to delay, right? So guess who gets to appoint the special master? She does, right? So that takes a lot of time for however long she wants to wait. Or the Department of Justice can appeal. But if they appeal to the 11th Circuit, which is controlled by Republicans. So the 11th Circuit could then wait on that appeal for a long time. But even if the 11th Circuit goes super quick, right, they could appeal that to the Supreme Court, which, as we already know, infected by Trump judges, and they could delay and delay and delay. And the whole idea here is not to get him off because they can't, because he's guilty, but it's to delay it to the point where they can get to another election, remove the current Department of Justice, get a pro-Trump, perhaps Trump himself, back in the White House. That's their game plan. And Eileen Cannon, Trump Judge Eileen Cannon, is playing right into that game plan.
Et voila. Let me bring you in, Glenn. Have you, as a former prosecutor, ever had an instance where you had a theft, where you had the product of the theft in the custody of law enforcement, and have a judge intervene and say, because when law enforcement went into that property and took the products of that theft, there were personal items mixed in with the items owned by someone else, the items that were stolen, that because there might have been a magazine that Trump subscribed to in that list of things, or some clothing that was Trump's that were literally thrown in the box with the classified materials. Have you ever heard of law enforcement being halted, saying you cannot investigate this person any further? Has that ever happened in your career?
Not in 30 years of prosecuting cases in courts, both military and civilian. This is the kind of stuff that gets dealt with, if at all, in motions to suppress in the run-up to trial or in run-of-the-mill evidentiary rulings at trial. And I'll tell you, Joy, the most dire thing that this judge did, and you just put your finger on it, She ordered the government to stop criminally investigating Trump and company for the theft of national security information. You know what that means? First of all, the good news is DOJ said, look, we've already looked at all of it, and we are already, following investigative leads based on it. But here's where the problem comes in. Let's assume that based on their review of these documents that Donald Trump stole from the federal government and unlawfully concealed, even in violation of a subpoena at Mar-a-Lago, let's assume that the federal prosecutors subpoenaed people to testify as a result of what they learned in those documents. And maybe those witnesses are scheduled to appear before the grand jury tomorrow and give really important sworn testimony about the crimes of Donald Trump. Judge Cannon just ordered the government to stop, withdraw those subpoenas. You know what else? When we seize paper, documents as evidence in a criminal case, you know what we often do? We submit it for forensic testing. We look for latent fingerprints that help us identify a perpetrator. We look for DNA, epithelial cells that slough off your skin. You leave them on documents. Those forensic tests of this evidence of crime that was found in Donald Trump's possession, those tests may be ongoing, and Judge Cannon just said, stop investigating Donald Trump. That, in my opinion, is judicial insanity.
And misconduct, potentially. Is it allowed for a judge to essentially stop the investigation of a crime in progress? Stop the investigation, halt it. Have you ever heard of that?
I've never experienced it, but you know what? A judge's order, if it's not manifestly unlawful on its face, such that you can file a petition for a writ of mandamus, there is a remedy here. The Department of Justice needs to appeal, and this may be one of the few times that Merrick Garland's instincts to protect the institution might actually work to the advantage of the rule of law. In my opinion, it's worked to the disadvantage of the rule of law, like in his poor decision in the E. Jean Carroll case. Here, it might actually work to the advantage of the rule of law, because a judge cannot invoke a non-existent privilege, executive privilege. These documents, as Ellie said, belong to the executive branch. Joe Biden is the one who has the power to waive executive privilege. Donald Trump stole them from the executive branch, and now they've been returned to the executive branch. Donald Trump doesn't have a legally cognizable privilege to assert. So DOJ had better appeal this decision rather than feeding the judicial monster, because if you feed the judicial monster, you're going to get more bad opinions and decisions like this one.
Hugo, let me bring you in here. What is the reporting on the reaction within Trump world and potentially within the Department of Justice and Biden world? Has there been any reaction so far?
Well, Trump world behind the scenes, they're thrilled. They think they've won this great procedural victory. And, as Ellie and Glenn have said, they see this as a way to delay the investigation. This buys them time. The Justice Department and Merrick Garland, in their caution, have previously indicated that they are not going to start taking judicial action 60 days before an election. We're awfully close. I think we're like 64 days away from an election. So they want to push this over into that 60-day bracket so that the Justice Department can't do anything in the lead up to the midterms. They want to buy themselves time. And so Trump world is thrilled at today's decision. I think they're particularly thrilled that they managed to get Judge Cannon to issue an order on this. They're particularly happy that she even heard the case, right? Because there was some indication that Trump was shopping around judges. The very Trump judge that he appointed heard the case. And so I think the culmination of all of these factors puts Trump in, the best place he could ever imagine, given he's under espionage investigation and potential obstruction investigation.
Indeed, and judge shopping works, especially when you're shopping at home. It's like shopping in one's own closet. Ellie, I'm going to come back to you on this, because the question then is, you mentioned appeal, Glenn mentioned an appeal. If the appeal is only going to go to the 11th Circuit, which is more Trump, who literally appears to be above the law.
I feel like this. If it was a woman trying to control her own body, Samuel Alito would say, no, she can't by Friday. Because it's a white man trying to get away with espionage, it could well be the Supreme Court doesn't hear this case for 12 months. I mean, that's just the reality that we're living in, right? Like the judge has issued a stay, as Glenn said exactly, forcing the government to stop its investigation. The government should immediately appeal. That can go up to the 11th Circuit. But while the 11th Circuit is considering the case, do they lift the stay so that the investigation can continue, or do they keep the stay? A Trump judge panel might well keep the stay while the 11th Circuit kind of deliberates. Another little poison pill that Judge Cannon put in her decision, it's in a footnote, she suggested that perhaps the 11th Circuit wasn't even the right place for this case to be heard, that it should be heard in front of the D.C. Circuit. Now, as Hugo just pointed out, that's actually correct. We're only here because Trump was looking for a Trump judge. But now the Trump judge is saying, actually, maybe I shouldn't be the judge. It should be the D.C. Circuit. That could add additional delay. And then obviously, even if Trump loses in front of the 11th Circuit or the D.C. Circuit, that decision can be appealed to the Supreme Court, and they can take their sweet little time to hear that case whenever they want. And if that happens after the midterms, it will obviously happen after the midterms. And if that happens after in the lead up to the 2024 election, that's completely within the Supreme Court's purview to continue the stay and not hear the case. Again, I kind of always come back to this point because it's so critical. If you let Republicans control the judiciary, this is what happens. There is no way around. As Glenn said, you can't stop a judge's order, even if it's kind of grossly negligent and bad. You can't make it go away if you don't have higher courts willing to overturn it. If you let Republicans control both the district court and all the higher courts, what are you going to do?
Okay, well, I'm going to keep the three of these guys with me because I have more questions. My panel is going to stay with me on the other side of the break, and this is key. If this investigation were being allowed to go through, what would investigators be doing? Oughtn't they be searching Trump's other properties? A photo taken at Trump Tower suggests yes, they should. Stay with us on this special 2-hour early bird edition of the Reid Out. Okay, I want y'all to take a look at this picture. This is the newly renovated Trump-themed bar in New York's Trump Tower. Now, if you just zoom in on one of the little tchotchkes on the wall there, you will see what appears to be an empty classified documents folder. Now, we don't know whether that came from Mar-a-Lago or if it's the real deal. But at this point, I mean, who knows? The judge says we can't even find out. Joining me, back with me are Hugo Lowe, Elie Mystal, and Glenn Kirshner. I want to put up a list of the properties that Trump owns. Most of the things with his name on it, he just gets a fee for putting his name on it. He doesn't own a lot, but he owns Mar-a-Lago, the Trump Tower penthouse, the Trump National Golf Club at Bedminster in New Jersey, a thing called Seven Springs, Trump Park, and Trump Park Avenue. Hugo, inside of Trump world, they are relieved, obviously, because this judge has given him a bly and basically said he's untouchable for now. But had the Trump world begun to contemplate whether other properties might also be searched?
Yeah, and Joy, we've been speaking to people close to the former president for a few weeks now. Can I just say that they were aware of this and were kind of thinking about this in days since the FBI first searched Mar-a-Lago. This has been something on their minds for some time, which I think is quite indicative of almost like a sense of guilt that there might be other documents lying around. There's something really interesting that I picked up on over the weekend. If you look at the statement that the Trump lawyers gave back to the DOJ, it said something along the lines of, we have reviewed all of the documents, all of the boxes and materials that came down from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, and specifically Mar-a-Lago. It was almost as though the Trump lawyers were kind of covering their backsides here to say, look, we don't know about the other properties. We only know what we were directed to look at, and to the best of our knowledge, looking through the documents and boxes and materials from the White House to Mar-a-Lago only, we can certify that these are the documents responsive to the subpoena. I thought that was really interesting and potentially indicative of the fact that there may be more documents elsewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, there has also been claims that, Trump wanted the documents for his library. That's one of the excuses. Any talk in Trump world ever about him having a Trump library? Not that he would be allowed to just have government documents and put them in there, but that's for you.
Look, there was Look, there was some discussion at a very kind of blasé level, almost like a joke that, Trump could have a presidential library, because it's not like he signed great, pieces of legislation into history, particularly. It's not like he had a lot of documents or things from the time in his administration that he kept. As we all know, he ripped up a lot of the documents anyway. So whenever a Trump library was brought up, it was really in the context of, oh, wouldn't it be funny if Trump had a library? So the idea that anyone took this seriously, I think, is complete nonsense. And the fact that Trump's bringing this up as a potential defense now is only one of, several spurious arguments that he's raised in trying to somehow defend against his undefendable conduct.
Glenn, while all of this is happening, we know that in 2021, that there was a rash of deaths of American spies. They were being caught. They were being killed. This is a very real and exigent circumstance. And the CIA has admitted to that. We are not saying that we know that there is some connection between the Purloined documents and those events. But they did happen at a time when Trump did have custody of some really sensitive information that he shouldn't have had. You think about that. You think about Victor Vesselberg, who's being investigated for something else, for fraud. But he's a, Russian oligarch, sort of Trump and crony world. His house recently got raided. His yacht got seized. He's being investigated for something totally different. But Trump knows the kinds of people who one might want to investigate, who might want to do bad things to the United States and might not be on our side. And I wonder how frustrated you think law enforcement must be knowing that they can't look into any of that.
Both our intelligence community and our law enforcement community must be beside themselves right now, because Donald Trump absolutely has information and evidence about how those documents that he stole and unlawfully concealed at Mar-a-Lago might have compromised national security. The reason I state that definitively is because he knows who he showed them to, who he let copy them, who he let take a snapshot of them, who he might have who he might have given, or worse, sold the information that was in those 43 empty classified documents folders. He has this information in his head, at least some of it. And from outward appearances, Joy, our federal government has done nothing to extract it from him. Just imagine if other living presidents, right? President Bush, President Clinton, President Carter, President Obama had information up here that could help protect our national security, that could help mitigate a national security threat. You think they would just kind of sit back and keep it to themselves? They couldn't sprint to the executive branch quickly enough to share it, to provide it, to mitigate the threat. This executive branch, this Department of Justice, has not, at least as far as we know, demanded Donald Trump sit down for an interview and debrief to provide the information he has up here about what he did with those documents that could help protect our nation. This Department of Justice hasn't subpoenaed him and compelled him to appear before the grand jury to divulge what he knows about how he compromised our national security. I know that brings with it problems like, would you have to grant him immunity? Doesn't that make the prospect of a successful prosecution more difficult? Yes, but one thing at a time. We've got to take the first step on the road to trying to protect our nation. And then the third thing that they could be doing, and they're not, they could be arresting Donald Trump because they have probable cause plus. Arrest him, Mirandize him, notwithstanding the Supreme Court's recent opinion, Miranda's still a thing, and then interrogate him if he waives his Miranda rights and extract from him information that can protect our national security. As best we can tell, the Department of Justice is doing none of that.
Ellie, Glenn had tweeted the other day after learning today that Trump had 43 empty folders in his office that should have contained classified documents. The FBI and DHS are now searching and seizing boxes from the New York and Florida properties of Russian oligarch Victor Vesselberg. Coincidence? We don't know. Again, we don't know the answer to that. But I wonder, from your having read through this order, would this order from this judge prevent, if in this separate investigation of Victor Vesselberg, who's a Russian oligarch whose yacht was seized and some sort of fraud investigation, would this order prevent federal law enforcement from investigating whether for, I don't know, Trump, he has any of those documents. Like, can they do any investigation whatsoever per this order?
It's not so much that I think the order would prevent that, although there's a credible argument that it does. It's that Victor Vesselberg's attorneys are going to say that the order prevents that, right? Like, you have to remember that the other side is trying to win too, right? The bad guys are trying to win too. And what Trump Judge Cannon has done is given the bad guys more ammunition to try to shield their clients from accountability, criminal liability, and responsibility, from telling the truth, right? So that's what you always have to remember. There's always two sides to the argument, and the bad people hire lawyers too. And so that's what they're going to say. Thanks a lot, Trump Judge. Another investigation that you've probably just ruined with your idiotic order. But like the bigger context here, and it really does go to what Glenn is saying, that Trump stole these documents, clear as we can tell, sometime in January or December of 2020, right? That was a long time ago. And we knew that he stole these documents, or at least law enforcement knew they stole these documents. For all of this time, let him voluntarily return some documents 2 years later that simply confirm the severity of what he stole and how dangerous he was. It took them another length of time to get the to go after him and reclaim the documents. This is why you can't let criminals walk free. You have to arrest them and stop them when you can, so they don't continue to commit crimes.
Don't try this at home, kids, unless you can appoint your own judge. And you can't. Only he could do that.
They'd have got me.
Hugo Lowell.
They'd have stopped me.
We'd all be under the jail. Trust me. Trust and believe. Don't try this at home. Hugo Lowell, Elie Mystal, Glenn Kirshner, thank you all very much.